vitamin A again, or vitamin A retinol, or whatever. So the parentheses, you think, oh, I should be able to see parentheses, that'll tell me it's real. But what they do again is they just say, oh, well, the wise consumers are looking for parentheses, so now just put a chemical name in there. You want to look for plant source name in the parentheses. And on this bottle, everything was listed properly, everything was in parentheses with the plant listed. I said, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Where did you get this? She said, at the local health food store where I get all of my nutrition. I said, that is incredible. What did this cost? She said, $60. I'm like, wow, $60 for a month's supply of just vitamins? That is so expensive. And she said, no, that was just for 2 weeks. I'm like, oh my goodness, 2 weeks? Can you imagine paying $120 a month for just vitamins? I told her for sure, don't throw that away. This is really good. But do you see the problem here? It's just no one can, it's just cost prohibitive to put real vitamins, real minerals, real nutrition in health food stores. So few do it because who would pay $120 a month for just vitamins? So this is a tragedy. As we help with people to learn and determine how it is that they can read their labels, the goal is that we can just be aware that what we think is not necessarily so, and do your homework so that you can choose to incorporate what is efficacious, utilized by your body. There are sources. Your host for today can direct you to sources if you choose to pursue vitamins and minerals that are 100% utilized by your body. And for sure, take the Consumer Awareness Guide home so that you can just read your labels and be sure that what you're taking is actually beneficial to you. In my journey towards wellness, the biggest component that became a huge missing link turned out to be what we learned about a little-known field of science called glycobiology. Glyco is Greek for sweet, biology, of course, science, so it's the science that studies sugar. 9 out of 10 people have no idea this science exists. We certainly had no idea about it. Not one of my 6 doctors, 4 of them specialists, nor my nutritionist could direct me to the field of science that changed the course of my life. I will never forget the day a gal in my water aerobic class that she came and asked me, have you ever investigated the science of glycobiology? Do you know anything about this science? She said she'd just gotten some printed material in the mail and she's like, oh my gosh, you've got to read this. She couldn't believe what she was learning. So here I am reading about this science that studies sugar, and in fact specific sugars, sugar nutrients. I had spent 6 years trying to cut sugar out of my diets, believing that sugar was causing havoc with my immune system. And here I was learning that there were specific sugars that played this critical role in how well my immune system communicated. And these were sugar nutrients surrounding every single cell in the body that allow the messages to be sent clearly, much like the vowels of the alphabet. A, E, I, O, U. If we have those vowels in place, we understand this conversation. You take those components out, then we don't understand our conversation at all. They're that important. Well, these sugar nutrients I was reading are very much like the vowels of the communication system within our bodies. We've got to have them. We're supposed to be eating them from our food every day. What are the ramifications of the fact that they are gravely missing? That's what the article was telling me, that these sugar nutrients are gravely missing from our food today. So here I was, supposed to be eating them every day, and yet they were gravely missing. I had just told my husband a few days earlier that what is wrong with me? I was so sick and tired of being sick and tired, frustrated every day working, trying to just get through the day. And here I was, so completely spent, so completely done, physically done. And I remember sitting on my husband's lap in tears. I said, "What is wrong with me? Something has got to be missing." And now I'm reading this printed material about a field of science called glycobiology. Had no idea that there really was something missing. So I want to introduce you to these sugars. The two on the left, glucose and galactose, these are the two that we get in our diets every day. We get plenty of these sugars. But the 6 on the right, mannose, xylose, fucose, and this is not fructose, fucose, N-acetylglucosamine, N-acetylgalactosamine, and N-acetylneuramic acid or sialic acid. These are 6 sugars that are gravely missing from our food sources. So what are the ramifications of the fact that we are not eating them as we are designed to do? So I want my husband to share with you some of the things that he learned as he delved into the study of this science.
Most exciting and interesting information that I discovered as I started to investigate these sugars has to do with the ABO blood typing system that we use across the world. We have type A blood, type B, type O, and type AB. And surrounding each of these red blood cells, I have a legend down here at the bottom that you can see. 4 of these sugars, there are 8, as Angie mentioned, 4 that surround red blood cells. And they're arranged in a particular sequence, and there's actually 800,000 strands around every single red blood cell. That's almost 1 million strands of sugar around every single red blood cell. That's like a beard. The whiskers of the beard are these strands of sugar, and it covers the face of the cell, a forest or a shroud of sugars. Angie is type A blood. And these strands of sugars that are around her red blood cells have lots of different names. They can be called glycoproteins, glycolipids, cell adhesion molecules, cell surface sugar structures, cell receptors. Antigens is how the medical community refers to them. But I've taken one of those strands and I've blown it out, off to the side of the red blood cell. So if you look at type A, you'll see the 5 sugars that make up Angie's red blood cell. It starts with a molecule of galactose as the base right next to the cell membrane. And then the next 4 are in always the same order. And the last sugar that she has is a sugar called N-acetylgalactosamine. And that's the sugar on the very outside of the red blood cell. I'm type B blood. If you look at my blood sugars, it also starts with a molecule of galactose at the base of the membrane. And in fact, the next 4 sugars, those 4 sugars are the same as type A, but my last sugar, the 5th sugar on the outside of the red blood cell, is different than type A. It's a molecule of galactose. And when I was studying this, it became apparent that there is no difference between type A and type B blood. They are the same. The red blood cells are the same. The sugars are pooled from the same 4. The sequence is virtually the same. The only difference between type A and type B blood is that last terminal sugar. But you know that if Angie's type A blood was transfused into my type B body, would my body have a problem with that? It will create antibodies, and they will go in and seek out and destroy every single one of those type A red blood cells. And the ramifications are as I will suffocate and die. And so when I learned that, it framed a question for me. And the question it framed was this: does the body know anything about these sugars if one sugar out of place has the power over life or death? That is a lot of power for a sugar to have in the body. Now, if you're type AB blood, 4% of the population is, you'll notice that you have the A sugar pattern and the B sugar pattern. I've shown that above and below the red blood cell. You're also known as the universal receiver, which means that you can receive blood from anyone because you recognize the 2 dominant patterns. You won't create antibodies because you're good with those other blood types coming into your body. Type O is the most predominant blood type. When you look at the sugars there, you'll see that there are only 4. Now these 4 are organized and sequenced in the same manner that type A or type B is. But because they only have 4 and they're missing the 5th offending sugar, that's why type O is known as the universal donor. They're the only blood type that can donate their blood not only to themselves, but to all the other blood types. So these are the folks solicited in blood drives. Now, all of these sugars coat the red blood cells, but they also cover all 60 trillion cells that make you. Every cell in your body is covered by these sugars. Here's what they look. This is a picture of a red blood cell. You see the membrane of the cell, the nucleus, and then on the outside you see the kind of filmy protrusions off the membrane. We used to teach that the membrane was smooth, but you see that it has all of these sugars coming off of it. This represents the operating system of the cell. Nothing gets in or out of the cell unless it connects and talks through these sugars. So this is vital for cell communication and for identifying the cells to the immune system. The National Academy of Science is a governmental body that's made up of folks who are Nobel Prize winners or you've been nominated by a Nobel Prize winner. It's our top elite scientific community in Washington, D.C. They came out with a 200-page publication called Transforming Glycoscience. And in that publication in October 2012, they suggested that they want to take this science and they want to take it from the corner where it's been studied in a niche science called glycobiology. They want to make it mainstream. They want to push it down through the colleges and the junior colleges and into the high schools. They need career paths. They need the kids to be excited. They need folks to be into this field so that we can develop the instrumentation, a knowledge base of how these sugars work, because it turns out that these sugars represent the frontier of medicine. Now, I've taken 4 quotes from that 200-page publication. The first one at the top states that every living cell on planet Earth is covered with a dense and complex array of glycans, or these sugars. So there's a shroud of sugars covering every cell, not only all human, but all animal and all plant. Every living organic cell has these sugars, and they're the operating system for the cell. And the second bullet, they stated every disease that affects humans significantly involves these glycans, or these sugars. They play a part in all of the diseases that are being manifest. And so this is why it is the frontier of medicine. We need to understand what the biomarkers are for these disease states. In addition to every major disease, they're involved in almost every biological process that goes on in your body. So all of those chemical reactions that are going on, most of them involve these sugars. The last bullet down here, I have a picture that goes along with it, and you see these tree structures that represent these sugar organized on these cells with a cell antenna system that looks like trees. They're bush-shaped. They're complicated structures. If I were to eliminate any of those, just part of those class of sugars, the cell will die because it can no longer identify itself. It can't tell the body its nutrient needs. And so these sugars are the operating system. I can actually go in and take the nucleus out of the cell, denucleate it, and the cell will continue to live for months. It can't reproduce because I've taken its DNA away, but the cell will live. If we disrupt any of these sugar structures on the cell, on the outer surface of that cell, the cell will die immediately because it cannot communicate. What's exciting about this is that a national organization has put together this information about glycoscience and has identified it to the world, that this represents the frontier of medicine. And with the emphasis on this education of learning more about how these sugars are involved in our bodies, we're excited to see where the science will lead. And truly, it does represent the frontier of medicine. In this segment, we'll talk a little bit about how the cells are structured and how the sugars interact with these cells. On this picture on the left, you'll see the nucleus of a cell, the cytoplasm, and then the cell membrane. Again, in biology textbooks, this membrane used to be a smooth surface, but you can see that it's very hairy with a lot of these sugars protruding from the cell membrane. On the right, you'll see an illustration, a picture of these cells. There are two of them, one cell membrane kind of arcing down to the left, and the other one on the top. In between that, you'll see the glycocalyx. You'll see that those sugars are connected to each other. The cells are connected via those sugars. When they are doing this, we call them cell adhesion molecules. But also, in addition to holding you together, and this is how you're held together by these sugars, signals and communication takes place across these cell antennas. So the cell on the top will communicate something to the cell on the bottom, but it must do that through those sugars. They serve as the antenna system for the cell. This illustration on the left shows some spherical cells. The hairy protrusions are these glycoproteins. You'll see the two lower cells are holding on to each other, again, as cell adhesion molecules. The cell at the top is kind of an abnormal looking cell. It's devoid of those glycoproteins. It's not able to communicate with the immune system, and so things are going wrong with it. It's barely hanging on to the cell below it. When it loses those glycoproteins, it will no longer be anchored to those cells on the bottom. It will be free to transverse through the body, through the circulatory system, through the lymphatic system, and if it's a cancer cell, it will lodge somewhere and become a secondary cancer. This is called metastasis, when cells lose that adhesion and are no longer anchored to the tissue. On the right is an illustration of a cell. You can see the green part is the protein going through the cell membrane, and then the purple pinkish color are the sugars. So again, they branch out in bush-shaped structures. Good guys and bad guys connect here to these sugars. White blood cells will connect and identify whether this cell belongs in the body or needs to be destroyed. Bad guys like bacteria will dock here and release a toxin. Viruses are more tricky. They'll actually kidnap the manufacturing plant within the cell to make copies of themselves. Hormones also attach here at this point. So this represents the operating system of the cell. Nothing gets in or out of the cell except via those sugar structures. There are a lot of models out there that talk about sugar, and we've learned a lot in recent years. But one of the theories that we had that turned out not to be true is that we thought sugar was just used for energy production. And you took sugar in to increase your metabolism and to get energy. While that's true, we didn't know about these other sugars. These other 8 sugars are not fuel sugars. They're not metabolized. They're important for cell-to-cell communication, for the immune system to do its job. On the lower right, you'll see a macrophage, a white cell that is actually moving towards bacteria, and those sugars allow it to sense who belongs in the body and who does not. In this slide, you'll see another model that said that all sugar was changed to glucose. All you needed to eat was glucose, and the body would take care of everything else. Well, the French discovered that that was not true. Your body is actually looking for these other sugars. In the gut, there are cell receptors looking for that. In fact, they were so impressed by what they found in their study in 1998 that they said, this represents a new class of nutrient. Similar to vitamin and mineral, we now have something called glyco or sugar nutrients. Again, they weren't broken down from glucose. They're not the same as table sugar. They don't impact blood sugar negatively because they're not metabolized. They build structures. The immune system must have them. The macrophage that you see in that picture, again, needs to have in order to sense who belongs in the body and who does not. This particular slide shows the communication system power of these sugars. We originally thought it was protein-based, but proteins don't have enough combinations to make enough letters in the sugar-coated vocabulary that the immune system needs. Because when you cut your finger, the immune system somehow knows that the cut is here, not on your index finger or your pinky finger or on this hand or on your foot. It directs the forces to the right location, initiates the inflammatory response, and takes care of you and protects you. How does it do it? Well, it does it with these 8 sugars. And these 8 sugars are actually hexagonal in nature, and they are 3-dimensional. So they're much more complex, and scientists have estimated that there's somewhere between 1 times 10 to the 14th and 1 times 10 to the 15th chemically unique letters in this sugar-coated alphabet. Now 1 times 10 to the 14th, I've written it out for you, a 1 followed by 14 zeros. It's pronounced 100 trillion, and 100 trillion is huge. If I take off the first 6 digits and replace them with a 1 followed by just 9 zeros is a lot smaller, and that number is pronounced 1 billion. And if I were to ask you how long a billion is, I would use seconds, because seconds go by pretty quickly. And if you had a billion seconds, how long is that? And when you calculate it, it turns out to be 31.7 years. 31.7 years is what a billion seconds is. And we're talking about a communication system that is 100,000 billions. That's a lot of letters, which make a lot of words, which make a lot of phrases, which communicate chemically the activities that we know our immune system does